Okay, deck tech. Let's get into it, shall we? So, all right. So what are we doing here? I mean, we just went 5-0. Well, technically, I actually did. I did some practice games after the 5-0 Hammer League. But like, why are we thinking about switching decks after we went 5-0? Well, the answer is very simple. I'm not gonna lie. That 5-0 came at the end of a lot of very mediocre results. I mean, like one of my first tweets with Hammer Time is that I've been consistently getting pretty mediocre results, and honestly speaking, like, I was really surprised I went 5-0 because the thing about Hammer Time is you just can't frickin' beat Control. Like, most of Control is just impossible. I mean, like, sometimes blue-red Control, because red is basically their only removal color, sometimes Sanctifier and Vec, jukes them, as they say. Sometimes, Grixis Control, if that's even a thing, since it's in red and black. Sometimes, like, blue-black Control, which isn't much of a thing, as much as red-blue sometimes is, with, like, Through the Breach and whatnot. Yeah, Through the Breach is okay, I think, but even sometimes then, the Through the Breach combo will get you. Sometimes in Hammer Time, though, you got so many random permanents sitting around that you can deal with the attack, and then a lot of times you can kill in the crackback. Yeah, but at the end of the day, to be honest, even like in the matchups that did lean heavily on red, and even like blue-black Control sometimes, even then, the problem is, a lot of times the blue could do a lot of heavy lifting, countering your hammers, stealing your hammers. That's the thing, actually, Archmage's Charm, man, like stealing your Germ tokens, stealing your Mem Knights, stealing your Thraben Inspectors, sometimes attached with lots of hammers, stealing your Inkmoth. Oh, I can see, I don't think it's land. Actually, let's see, I think I still have Archmage's Charm in my collection. Archmage. Maybe not. Okay, we'll just have to look it up. I had it at one point, but I just never played it in Merfolk. I bought it just in case I needed it in Merfolk, but so I don't really see that almost ever happening. And I can always buy it if I need it. Non-land permanent. Okay, so they can't gain control of Inkmoth Nexus, but anyway, you get the point. Thinking you can control your hammer even sometimes. That doesn't actually do much usually, but yeah, just Archmage's Charm, just countering, Cryptic Command, tapping your team, bouncing, and they can even end a turn bounce your Sanctifier and Vec, even if it has like one hammer on it, they can take one hit, and to turn bounce the Sanctifier, and then you're in such a bad spot a lot of times. Anyway, look, there's a lot to like about Hammer, and there's some, like, basically Hammer, I think, Hammer Time is a very polarizing type of deck, in that there are some matchups that are very, very favorable, but then there are some matchups that are, like, really, really tough, like Control. That's somewhat how Infect is, but honestly, my Control matchup feels like eons better with Infect, partially because I think it's like the 8 Inkmoth Nexi, and like, the 4 Inkmoth and the 4 Sylvan Scrying to fetch them, plus the 8 Hierarchs to produce enough mana to facilitate all that. I just feel like, being able to set up for an attack on my turn a lot of times is a little bit safer. That being said, I mean, Infect kind of has a similar issue. It kind of folds to Plague Engineer. It mostly folds to Blood Moon, not as hard, but it kind of mostly folds to Blood Moon. Mostly folds to Magus of the Moon, even harder because it shuts off the removal spell that I like to play, which I could go back to Dismember, but it's not about Infect. Look, long story short is, what I really liked is actually the sort of Stoneblade package. That didn't necessarily come up a lot in that league, but it did come up, and like, it just felt kind of better just attacking with that Sanctifier Invec, and then getting a Sword of Fire and Ice triggers. So that kind of, I think, triggered something in me in a way. Just, it kind of triggered, in a way, something inside me that I just kind of want to play a deck that's more about, like, attacking with the Sword of Fire and Ice, more about getting the Batterskull. I mean, you can kind of mesh the two together, but, maybe I want to do the deck that does that plan better, instead of kind of mixing them. But hey, we went 5-0 with it. I think there's definitely some merit to mixing. I call it Hammer Blade, because you kind of mix the Stoneblade concept together with the Hammer Time concept, but why not just go full taxes, in a sense? So, yeah, and look, at the end of the day, I already played some practice games. I'm telling you all right now, look, I like the Hammer deck, but I think there's a 90% chance that I'm going to switch over to taxes. Like, I gotta be honest, I'm not necessarily getting more spectacularly better results. In fact, if I'm going to be honest, I'm still kind of getting kind of mediocre-ish results. I actually think I'm doing slightly better, because I don't think I've ever done less than a 3-2 so far in a league, but I've only maybe done like one. Did I do two? I think I did like part of a league, and then and then something came up, and I don't know, like I can't remember what happened, but I at least did part of a league, and then I did like a full league, which I think I got 3-2, and I did do 2 leagues, yeah, because I remember I did that league that I tweeted, and I did 1 league before that with Leon and Arbiter, so yeah, I did do 2 leagues, because I was remembering some games with Leon and Arbiter, but yeah, like I definitely did. I definitely did 2 leagues. Actually, I think I went like 1-3, honestly, with that Arbiter league. So maybe that's what I'm remembering. Like I didn't finish the 5th match. I just really hated Leon and Arbiter, and I know that card's been like in the archetype forever. But I don't know. So help me, it just when it didn't do anything, it just felt so bad. It was just a 2-2 that did stone nothing. Oh, and I remember what happened. My 4th match was against a fellow Death and Taxes deck, and they played Charming Prince, and I think they bought back. They weren't playing Thraben Inspector, but they bought back, I think a Stoneforge Mystic, and like that was that. I knew like once I was getting trashed by that deck, which I don't think they saw their Arbiters. Like they probably were playing them, but they didn't see their Arbiters, and so like they were playing Charming Prince, and they were buying back their Stoneforge, buying back their Skyclave Apparition, and at that point I'm just like, okay, I'm done with Arbiter. Like I've had enough. So anyway, so that then I did another league. With a similar version of this deck. It was basically the exact same deck. I had 2 Horizon lands and 0 Flagstones. What I realized though, and I had a very similar makeup. Just I didn't have Kaldra. I had all of the Skyclaves. What I realized though is like, holy shoot. What I realized was that hey shoot, if I'm not playing Leon and Arbiter, Flagstones of Trokair are basically completely free. I mean, not completely free. Sometimes opposing Leon and Arbiters can mess you up because you have to pay 2 if this happens. I mean, that that is a consideration. Taxes is something that appears from time to time, but I think overall, but sometimes against Emrakul through the Breach, sometimes you have like an extra land sitting around because you can sacrifice this and you still get it back. Sometimes against like Hawks or like the red-white land destruction deck that's floating around. Sometimes the Flagstones are just awesome sauce there. So they're kind of randomly sometimes bad against like opposing Leon and Arbiters, but sometimes they're randomly good against land destruction. I mean, definitely the biggest consideration is sometimes they're randomly bad against Blood Moons because you only have 8 actual white sources in a mono white deck. That can lead to some games where you're surprisingly hosed by Blood Moon. That being said, if you play a couple of them early, or you play one and you Ghost Quarter, and if you're cognizant that the opponent has Blood Moon, like against Ponza, for example. Although with Ponza, like Ghost Quarter is so tempting to have sitting around for the Utopia Sprawl. Although honestly, most of the time it doesn't really come up that much because by the time you can do this without screwing out your progression, a lot of times it's probably better to just hold on to your mana for your stuff. Because one of the things about Ponza I've noticed is they just flood a lot, I guess I should say a lot of times the games that you win more easily are the games where they flood a lot. I mean, they don't always flood, but like you don't, like yeah, I think flooding is a bigger issue for them than getting down on mana. I'm almost never mana screwed them, but they definitely have flooded out a lot of a decent amount of the time. So anyway, so let's go over what the hallmarks of the deck. So yeah, so first of all, Field of Ruin. I mean, this is a great card. It's kind of free non-basic land hate because you don't actually have to reduce your land count. They don't reduce their land count either, but a lot of times you're going to be using this because you don't necessarily have anything better to do. We've seen this used a lot against us, so we know the drill. But the cool thing is that with Aven Mindscensor, and this is an advantage over Leon and Arbiter, with Aven Mindscensor, it's pretty free because you almost never have enough mana left over to both crack this and pay 2 for your own Arbiter's, to ignore your own Arbiter's ability. You need 5 mana total for that, 3 to play the Field of Ruin and 2 to pay your Arbiter's tax. Whereas with Aven Mindscensor, you can do this like basically as any time that you have Mindscensor in play, and ideally you play it off of an Aether Vial, and then you have enough mana to work with here, and yeah, and then you can totally just get your land no problem. So sometimes you can put them down a land and you can stay the same land drops, which that's huge. That's way better than just putting them down and you down, and having to pay 3 mana at the same time. That's just my opinion, but I've thought that I felt like that's a lot more powerful. You know, Flagstones of Trokair, like I said, fairly free. Blood Moon is the biggest consideration, but if you're cognizant, sometimes you can play multiple, which I usually do anyway, and then you just get more planes, or Ghost Quarter them, which we'll get to in a second. Get more planes, and, you know, other than that, it's just mostly upside, and the upside is because, you know, discussing Ghost Quarter now, if you have one of these sitting in play, and you got Ghost Quarter in play, say you got 2 Ghost Quarters in play, but you got like a Skyclave Apparition or a Flickerwhisp, yeah, you can Ghost Quarter, you can tap your Flagstones, Ghost Quarter your own Flagstones, you'll get a planes come into play tapped, but you'll get another planes from the Ghost Quarter untapped, and then you play your 3rd land drop, and then you have and then you have 3, you have 3 mana, and you have all the white mana you need. Oh, you play the other Ghost Quarter, but then you have 2 planes, the one that you tap for, and then the one untapped from the Ghost Quarter, and then you play the other Ghost Quarter, and boom, you turned a 2 Ghost Quarter, 1 Flagstone hand into a 2 planes, 1 Ghost Quarter hand, which can basically play your entire deck. I mean, you know, that also works if it's a Ghost Quarter field room, but as long as at least one of these is a Ghost Quarter, it really goes a long way to making sure that some of your more awkward double white hands are a little less awkward, because I've actually had to Ghost Quarter myself before, like Ghost Quarter Field of Ruin or something. That never feels good, having to put yourself back a land drop just so you can color fix. And this hopefully will reduce the amount of times that'll happen. Let's try it out, because I think this will be the first league. I tried 1 2-man against like rogues. That was a little unfortunate. I had to leave early. They probably were winning that, but one thing I've noticed about this deck is this deck can definitely come back. But anyway, yeah, I didn't get too much of a feel for that, so this didn't come up in that practice game. But other than that, we're going to try to run this and see if this comes up much. But on a conceptual level, it's free enough that I don't really see why I wouldn't be doing this. I think I remember asking myself, why don't Taxes players play Flagstones? And then I remember, oh yeah, we got an Arbiter, that's why. Yeah, but since we're not playing Arbiter, well, that's not a concern for us, so. Anyway, Flagstones of, Ghost Quarter, I don't know, it also just can work with Aven Mindscensor, kind of like Field of Ruin. It does put us down lands, but sometimes it's worth it to try to go down a land drop to take, put them behind on land drops. You can also hit their utility lands. It's a little less exciting than Field of Ruin, but sometimes also you need it against Tron because you can do this before turn 3. With Aether Vial, that's justifiable. So unfortunately, without Aether Vial, that's just not happening. And it is worth noting that we're not playing Leon and Arbiter, and so some people might say, well, doesn't your Tron matchup hurt too much? Well, the reality is we weren't really Ghost Quartering them against Tron until turn 3 anyway, or we were Ghost Quartering before we had Arbiter in play. So the reality is, because it takes until turn 3 to take Aether Vial up to 2, and it takes until turn 3 to play Arbiter, then play the Ghost Quarter sack. Before that, you can play the Arbiter with the Ghost Quarter, but then you have to tap it, so you can't use it. So the reality is, you're not taking Tron off a Tron land, even with Arbiter on sooner than turn 3. So that's kind of a conceptual weakness, even with the Arbiter version. I mean, you can maybe turn off an expedition map, but you only really do that on the play. And if you're on the play, you're usually fine because you're Field of Ruin. I mean, my suspicion is you're usually fine, both because you're ahead enough on progression to sacrifice a land drop for them sacrificing a land drop with Ghost Quarter, and you're also just more golden with Field of Ruin because you can actually get to that before they hit their Tron mana. What I'm just trying to say is that no doubt about it, Leon and Arbiter is better against Tron, but I think I don't think it's as much better as my initial, at least, concern was. I admittedly did not run up against Tron with the Arbiter. Anyway, so yeah, Ghost Quarter, just kind of free in this deck, especially with the Flagstones feeds into the Taxes plan. I haven't really felt too screwed by it yet. It's been a mainstay, so I don't necessarily see myself deviating from it. Especially with the Flagstones of Trokair, which make me even less vulnerable to the mana screw from more brown mana. Anyway, so 8 planes. I could try to put an Iganjo Castle in here, or some other type of land. I don't know, Mistveil Plains, something like that. But that's just being too cute. I mean, Mistveil Plains has its moments, because if they kill an artifact, you can put it on the bottom, fetch it up again with Stoneforge or something like that. But honestly, it's just too cute, and I think the games you win are, you know, the games you lose are much more than the games you win. You lose way more games just having that land come into play tap and mess up your curve. Iganjo Castle is obviously more free, but I don't know. My concern is that with only 8 planes, you know, like, we're a little more susceptible to Blood Moon. We may even run out of basics ourselves, and it's good to have a lot of basics when we're Flagstoning of Trokair and sacrificing and ghost courting our Flagstones of Trokair and fielding of Ruin and getting a basic. Like, there's a very real possibility we run out of basics in a long game. So I feel like, you know, once you're like below 10 basics, I feel like every basic counts. So I'm kind of I'm fairly confident that it's correct to just have another basic when we're this low, so we're a little less susceptible to Blood Moon than it is for the mostly just non-existent times where Iganjo Castle does anything. So, you know, there you go. Aether Vial, I mean, we play Merfolk too, enough said, we all know Aether Vial is great. I'll explain a little more of the interactions when I get to the cards, but it definitely enables a lot of shenanigans with the cards that are not available without Aether Vial. Yeah, but even just without shenanigans, like, we know how great it is from playing Merfolk, so there you go. Oh yes, and actually in this regard, somebody asked why not Yorion taxes. I don't know. I see some people futching around with Yorion taxes. Deck seems okay. Sometimes Yorion seems amazing. Sometimes the deck kind of seems clunky and weird. Just on a conceptual level, I haven't tried it yet, but I just feel like, you know, okay, this might be a weird take, but I feel like Yorion might even be better in Merfolk, because, like, you reset all your Spreading Seas, you reset your Silvergale of Depths, you reset your Master of Waves, you reset your Aether Vial so it comes back, you know, and you can start ticking up again, which, you know, you can do, I guess, in this deck too. But, like, I mean, it's about the same, maybe. This has a lot of comes into play abilities, but these are, like, a lot more reactive, like Skyclave and, I mean, I guess Charming Prince, but not Charming Prince isn't maybe in all the even Yorion builds, although maybe it is in some. But anyway, long story short, I think the conceptual problem with playing Yorion in Death and Taxes is the same reason why I have a problem playing it in Merfolk. First and foremost, you see Aether Vial less, and this deck abuses Aether Vial even more than Merfolk. This deck gets a power boost way more than Merfolk. I think Merfolk, though, is, I don't know, like, I'm not going to necessarily compare. I like both decks so far, and I've definitely been getting better results with Merfolk, but part of that is I have way more experience, needless to say. So, you know, that's not, by no means does that mean Merfolk is a better deck. I just have way more experience playing it, so naturally, you'd expect I'd have better results. So far, I mean, maybe I'll accrue more experience as time goes on with this deck. But, yeah, Aether Vial, I can't imagine playing Yorion in a deck that just abuses Aether Vial so heavily, and the games just dramatically improve so much in the ones where you have Aether Vial, so... yeah, that's first and foremost. I mean, secondarily, too, like, sideboard cards, like, we're only playing 4 Relic of Progenitus as our, you know, graveyard hate. Yeah, you know, like, yeah, I just, like, against Dredge, good luck, you know, having a consistently mulligan to Relic when you've got 80 cards in your deck. Sometimes it's even hard to do that with 60. Anyway, so, yeah, so that's my... I highly doubt that Yurion's correct. I know some people have had success with it, but I just, no, I don't know. And I see some people on Twitter posting without Yorion, getting 5-0, so I know, you know, they probably have more experience than me with the archetype, and it's, I mean, I don't go by just what other people do, but it is comforting knowing that I'm not the only one that thinks you don't have to go Yorion. It's funny, for some reason when I play Yorion and Merfolk, people are like, oh, it's so crazy, it's so MHayashi, but then, like, in Death and Taxes, I don't play Yorion, and people are like, where's Yorion, that's so MHayashi, and I'm just like, man, if it's not, like, you know, it's just weird how different communities, like, the reality is, Yorion affects both decks in a very similar way, and it has very similar downsides in both decks, so, like, no, I mean, I don't know that there's a lot of overlap between Death and Taxes players and Merfolk players, so, like, now I got a foot in both worlds, and I'm telling you, so far my assessment is it's very similar. The impact that Aether Vial has on both decks is similar in the sense that it helps a lot. It's different in the sense that it helps this deck way more, which is I think even more of an argument to not play Yorion in this version. But anyway, I've been on that topic enough. Let's go to Thraben Inspector, and you know, you might be noticing a absence of a certain giver of runes, but I don't know. I've been loving Thraben Inspector. It's just been an extra body. This was one of my favorite cards when I was playing Hammer Time, or Hammer Blade as I call it. Yeah, it just draws a card. You know, you always have a body. You always get that clue token, so it's almost never dead. Late in the game, sometimes you just turn through your deck. I don't know what else to say other than that. Giver of Runes can always just be interacted with itself. So can Thraben Inspector, but it will always at least put you up a card. And for me, that counts a lot. But I think it gets even better. And honestly, I don't know why this is much of like a kind of crazy MHayashi-ism that somebody would even consider playing this instead of Giver of Runes. You could, I think, play both too. But as I describe the cards, I feel fairly confident that. I mean, you know, like you could say like based on the mediocre results I've had so far, you could say like, oh yeah, well that's just because you're not playing the cards other people are. I don't necessarily know about that. I'm going to try to build more experience. I'm going to try to keep playing the deck. So even if we don't necessarily set the world on fire at first, I'm not going to automatically blame the card choices. I feel confident enough, you know, like I explained it a little bit on Twitter, like I'm kind of a rationalist rather than an empiricist in some ways. I trust my ability to evaluate the cards, and I don't just rely solely on whether I win or lose, you know, sort of so-called results-oriented thinking. You know, I obviously factor results in. Results are obviously a huge component. They're maybe even like the strongest component, but like, you know, there's other super strong components too, which is just like my observation and the feeling I get, the observations and the analysis that I do of the cards and how they're affecting the matchup and what they're doing for me, and how much I'm missing other cards. Some of that is a little subjective, and you know could allow personal biases to creep in, but honestly, that even happens with like just interpreting data. Like if you just look at data results and you're just like, oh look, this deck won a lot. This deck's the best. I mean, you know, you still have to use some rationality. You can't just throw data around and like completely ignore just, you know, logical reasoning. Because I mean, well, what if that data was from like 2004? I mean, you know what I mean? I mean that's an extreme example, but in the world of Magic, sometimes being from just 6 months ago is like not necessarily indicative. But maybe it was from yesterday. Well, that's not too, you know. But like, how much is too long ago? It depends. Like, did a new set come out? Like, you know, like, there's still, you know, and also like, also just, you know, who are the people playing it? Were they people with experience? There's like all kinds of other things that go into just, you know, to assessing these things rather than just results. So that's kind of how I look at it too. So far, I've just been thoroughly impressed with Thraben Inspector, and especially I like the fact that Charming Prince, for example, like I can play turn 1 Thalia, Thraben Inspector, turn 2 Charming Prince, get another clue token. You know, I mean, not setting the world on fire, but but still, that's an instant, I guess 4 for 2 in a way, because this is automatically a 2 for 1, and then this gives you another 2 for 1, so that's a 4 for 2 basically. It's also good with Mortarpod for what it's worth, because like, you know, you don't want to sacrifice Giver of Runes, but you're fine to sacrifice Thraben Inspector. You know, that's a little more fringe, but you know, it does come up sometimes. It's better with Flickerwhisp. Same thing, you can Flickerwhisp your own Thraben Inspector if there's nothing better to do, and just get another clue token. That also comes up sometimes. Sometimes, like if you don't have Aether Vial, the main benefit to Flickerwhisp is going to be getting incidental value from your stuff, and this is just one more way you can do that. One problem with Giver of Runes is like, unless you got like in a deck that just had Stoneforge Mystic, I mean, yeah, you've also got Skyclave Apparition to flicker, but that only is worth it if there's a creature or a permanent on the other side that's worth taking, which a lot of times there is, but sometimes there isn't, and so it's not necessarily consistent. And that basically just leaves Stoneforge Mystic as the only kind of evergreen kind of card that might be sitting around that you can get incidental extra value on. But there's one problem with that. Like, just playing Stoneforge Mystic as your like flicker value sort of engine is that, first of all, it comes down on turn 2, so Charming Prince automatically, like, you know, you can't like curve into Charming Prince comfortably. I mean, you can in the sense you can play it on turn 3, but you don't go 1-2 like you can with a Thraben Inspector. And number 2, honestly, Stoneforge Mystic is living. A lot of times you're in pretty good shape anyway, so you don't necessarily need the extra help. You know, whereas Thraben Inspector just actually Thraben Inspector in this regard is kind of like Giver of Runes, because it's kind of a card they have to respect, because if it's sitting around, it can just generate extra value. And believe me, I've felt this against decks that play Wall of Omens. Sometimes Wall of Omens is deceptively the card you have to like get rid of, because they just keep blinking it and getting infinite value. And in some ways, I mean not always, but in some ways, Thraben Inspector is kind of like that too. So a lot of times they have to respect it, because especially if you don't have Aether Vial and you just have to, you know, like when you have Aether Vial, like more tricks open up, but when you don't, basically that's kind of how you milk your Charming Princes and your Flickerwisps for like a value a lot of times. So they have to respect it. So sometimes they have to remove it. But let me tell you, that basically meant it was just like Giver of Runes, which they also have to respect and they have to get rid of. But unlike Giver of Runes, this left a clue token behind. So look, I don't know what more I can say. Oh, another nice thing too is when you play Aether Vial, you can either you can either play this on turn 1, and if you got nothing else on turn 2, there's your turn 2, crack the clue. But also if you have Aether Vial, you can play Aether Vial, vial this in on turn 2, and if you got nothing else better, you can still crack the token, which sometimes you will do because sometimes you want to be more reactive when you have Aether Vial, so that opens up another line of play, and I don't know what more to say. I absolutely love Thraben Inspector. This is one of the reasons why I love white. This is one of the reasons why I want to play mono white. Whether it's Hammer Time or this deck, I just want to play Thraben Inspector. I can't get enough of this card. It's so funny. Like, I think some people see it like common and they assume it must be worse. I don't know, man. I don't think that way. I love this card. To me, this feels like it at least has an uncommon power level, and I'm just very glad that they printed it at common, so it's just widely available. And I just feel like sometimes, though, like people really do overlook some cards because they assume if it was better, the rarity would have been pushed, but I mean, come on, like, you know, by that logic, Fatal Push isn't as good as, like, Hero's Downfall or something, but we all know Fatal Push is better. Anyway, so, Mortarpod, like, I don't know what to say. This is kind of a holdover of the Hammer Time deck. Unlike Hammer Time, we don't necessarily need the body as much, but we can still use the body. I mean, mostly I'm just worried about getting stuck with a Sword of Fire and Ice and running out of bodies, but I like Mortarpod. Look, I mean, I'm willing to admit that this is probably the card most likely to get replaced at some point in the future, because heaven knows I've been loving Sword of Fire and Ice, Batterskull, and surprisingly the Kaldra, whatever it's called, the Kaldra. But yeah, I love Mortarpod. I'm not necessarily always fetching with Stoneforge. Sometimes I am. Sometimes, like, I'm at 4, and they have like a 1-mana card, and I just Stoneforge fetch it, you know, ping. But sometimes though, against certain matchups where I know they're going to kill my Stoneforge Mystic anyway, sometimes they have like a 1/1, like I don't know, that new Dragon Lord thing, or I don't know, or a Flickerwhisp against an opposing Death and Taxes deck. I mean, it depends. But there certainly are circumstances. Basically, whenever you can deal with a fairly powerful 1-toughness creature on the other side, always consider fetching Mortarpod. You'd be surprised. Yeah, you'd be surprised. Like, it brings deceptively more power to your game plan than you might think, versus like these obviously more pushed equipment. It's a much more subtle power, but just being able to off one of their problematic 1-toughness creatures, and then having this in play to deal with any other 1-toughness creatures, or for reach, like I explained in my Hammer Time video. You know, just being able to like push in, like sack, re-equip, like after you've attacked, you know, with your leftover mana. That gets them sometimes. Like, it actually gives you some reach. It's really surprising. Look, all I know is I actually freaking played this in Legacy, not really Death and Taxes, but like a Legacy Cawblade kind of Death and Taxes-ish deck, just without Aether Vial. I used to be a budget player, so I'm gonna admit I didn't. You know, when I first started playing Legacy, I couldn't afford Aether Vial, so there it is. So I kind of played a Death and Taxes type deck with some modifications. Like, I played freaking Squadron Hawk, which was surprisingly better than you might think, because like it made it very hard to run out of bodies. That is a consideration here too, but I just think the options we have are better based on what they do for us and whatnot, as I'm going to explain. I mean, at some point it might be worth considering possibly reaching for Squadron Hawk, especially when we don't have Leon and Arbiter. But yeah, long story short, I played Mortarpod in a Legacy Death and Taxes style type deck. I played it in my modern, more mono-white mid-range, you know, Steel Shaper Gift toolbox type deck before Stoneforge Mystic was unbanned type deck, which was surprisingly good, except it had the weakness of combo, which incidentally I think still Death and Taxes I think is still a little bit soft to combo, but obviously I do realize the Hate Bear type elements are here, so you know, it's it depends on the combo. Some combo I think we do fine against. Others not as much, but we'll see which ones are which as the more we play this. Charming Prince. Yeah, I've already kind of gone over this actually. Like, it's great with Thraben Inspector. You can blink that on turn 2. Sometimes just scrying 2. Sometimes if you just have like this 2 mana and no Aether Vial, sometimes this is invaluable. Sometimes the scry 2 is even better than the clue token, because sometimes you see like 2 non-lands on top and you just have to bottom both, and then you hit your land drops, you're more likely to hit your land drops, and you curve out better, and a lot of times you just would lose that game if you're just stuck on 2 mana forever. Much like Merfolk, sometimes this deck loses because it's just kind of clunky with that Aether Vial, and you need to have a lot of lands if you don't have Aether Vial, and Honestly, I don't even know. Some decks might play more than 20 lands because this deck is very mana hungry if you don't have Aether Vial. But Aether Vial kind of is an extra mana source, so we already are kind of playing 24 mana sources. I wouldn't recommend going over 20. I felt like 20 is just fine. But this goes a long way in some of those decks you don't have Aether. Some of those games you don't have Aether Vial because the Scry 2 can help you curve out, smooth you out a lot more. So I like that. Also against Burn, the 3 life is a great utility. But honestly, the main reason this is here is for the Exile effect, again with Thraben Inspector, but also, man, it's also, sometimes Flickerwhisp is just good in its own right, because they have, like, tokens or something, or like a 0 mana card, like Walking Ballista, which obviously is not a good example, because it can kill at any time, but, like, I don't know, Hangerback Walker, I don't know, there's, like, a lot of cards you'd be surprised at that technically have, like, 0 mana cost, and, you can flicker them, and then even if they kill it, they get a 0/0, I mean, it just comes back, or like, or Chalice of the Void, like even if they kill this, like, I mean, Chalice of the Void just comes back on 0, and we don't have any 0 cost cards, so it just doesn't do anything. So anyway, you can blink Flickerwhisp sometimes for extra value that way, if Flickerwhisp has that advantage. You can flicker your Skyclave Apparition. Oh, another thing that comes up, and like honestly, this happened against the Rogue deck, and this is where I definitely could have pulled ahead, but I wasn't thinking about it. Sometimes they, like, I think it was Ragavan, so I guess it was like, yeah, I think a Ragavan stole my Sword of Fire and Ice. Oh no, it was a Dothy, it was blue-black, but a Dothy Voidwalker, I think they, like, no, it was a green, black, blue. They, like, Assassin's Trophy, the Sword of Fire and Ice, and then Dothy Voidwalker was in play, so they put a Void counter, and then they played it, and then they equipped. And what I forgot, and I think I would have pulled way ahead, is I had a Charming Prince in my hand. I think I could have pretty much immediately just played this, because it says another target creature you own. Wait a minute. Oh, sorry, it's creature. Never mind. I guess did they deal with the Sword of Fire and Ice, or did they deal with the creature attached to it? Yeah, it would have had to have been the Sword of Fire and Ice. So actually, never mind that ability. But if for whatever reason, for example, they have Ragavan or Dothy Voidwalker, and they play one of your creatures, okay, it doesn't work on Sword of Fire and Ice, so it doesn't, so never mind that, but like, if they steal your creature or something, or they play one of it off the top of your library with Ragavan, it is worth noting it says creature you own, it doesn't say creature you control, so that means you can blink something they steal, and you can get it back, and definitely something to keep in mind. But here's the main thing I really like about Charming Prince, something really, really awesome. Solitude, okay? And you can start doing this as early as turn 3, when Vial's on turn 2, which is a full turn earlier, because you can do this with Flickerwhisp too, but you can do this a full turn earlier if you're playing Charming Prince. Which also, when I saw the Death and Taxes opponent play Charming Prince, I immediately realized the synergy with Solitude, so I should probably be on it, because I already think Solitude is better. I'll explain that in a bit. But like, what you can do with Solitude is you can flicker. Yeah, you can basically, on turn 3, you can exile a white card in your hand, play out Solitude, exile a creature that they have, and then in response, while the evoke trigger is on the stack, you can exile your own Solitude. It'll come back in the turn, you exile something else, and you still have the Solitude in play. It's basically like what do you call that? Ephemerate. It's like an Ephemerate type deal. It's better and worse. I mean, if you need to deal with more creatures, Ephemerate's better, because then you can Ephemerate it again the next turn, and then remove like a third creature. But if there's only 2 creatures you need to deal with, actually Charming Prince is better, because you deal with 2 creatures, and then you have like Solitude and a Charming Prince body laying around, instead of sometimes with Ephemerate you may not necessarily have anything else to target. So yeah, I mean, this is kind of like our kind of Ephemerate. I suppose you could play Ephemerate in this deck, but I think this deck just does better with more bodies for the equipment and just abusing Aether Vial more, since we're already on it. Anyway, but that's something I really love about Charming Prince. You'd be surprised how much that comes up, but like, yeah, that is powerful. That is love. I don't know what else to say. Yeah. Anyway, I think I've discussed Charming Prince to death. Stoneforge Mystic. Okay, this time I think I'm just going to say enough said, because Stoneforge Mystic. Alright. I think most of the discussion in Stoneforge Mystic more comes up with the equipment that you go fetch. Thalia, Guardian of Thraben. I think also enough said, actually. Like, this sees play in Death and Taxes for obvious reasons. Makes everything... I will just say this one thing, though. Like, in addition to making all their stuff cost more, for me, the biggest selling point to Thalia is it doesn't suffer from the traditional problem that a 2-drop does, which is, I mean, a 2-drop that is less than, like, 4 toughness, or is otherwise able to be bolted. Because, yes, it only has 1 toughness, so even against Lava Dart, like, this doesn't have the traditional problem that other cards have. This will always, for the most part, unless they're playing Gutshot or something, in which case you still force them to pay 1 more mana, but, you know, this will almost never suffer the problem of being dealt with 1 mana, and you pay 2 mana. That's one of the hidden advantages, a lot of times, that 1 mana removal spell have, is a decent amount of time you're trading up in mana, so they pay 2 mana, you pay 1, and every time you pull ahead on mana, that really counts, so... But that'll never be an issue with Thalia, because they'll basically always have to pay 2, and that means that, that means that Thalia is never like too clunky. I mean Thalia's never getting like hosed too badly by cheap removal. I mean it's a lot of times you'd prefer they didn't have it, but the fact that you at least tax them on the removal for Thalia itself, that counts for a lot. And honestly, that alone, plus just the fact that it doesn't interfere with their Stoneforge Mystic, plus the fact that even after they made multiple land drops, it can still prevent them from playing like some higher curve threat of theirs, like Cryptic Command or whatever it is. I think this is really like the stronger taxes card, the stronger card that taxes them, as opposed to Leonin Arbiter. I really do believe that. I really love this card. So, Sword of Fire and Ice. This is also commonly played in Death and Taxes. I will just say briefly that sometimes I see them play sort of Feast and Famine. I've played sort of Feast and Famine in the Legacy Taxes-esque type deck myself. I eventually ended up gravitating that more towards the sideboard, and my sentiment is still kind of the same here, now that I'm in Modern, and in the other Modern deck that I played a long time ago. Ultimately, Sword of Fire and Ice, like, you might be looking at this and say, like, I mean, is protection from red always valuable? Is protection from blue always valuable? I mean, if you're giving +2 toughness, a lot of times aren't you already out of bolt range? Like, isn't something like Light and Shadow a little better because you're out of bolt range and basically all removal once you equip it? And yes, on some level you're right, but here's the ultimate reason. Whether or not you're eventually a blue deck or a red deck, the ultimate reason I think Sword of Fire and Ice is the best sword, hands down, you can have. And by the way, this is all over in Legacy, partially in a way because True Name Nemesis is everywhere, and this lets you get past that, but we don't have True Name Nemesis here. The advantage here to Sword of Fire and Ice is that it's always live. It always gives you 2 extremely relevant abilities. What that oftentimes means is even when you don't have protection, when you are attacking with this card, they are going to have to start chump blocking a lot of times. And I know you might be thinking, and I know I thought this too, when the first time I played this, actually, I freaking opened this in a sealed pod. Actually, the first sealed event I ever played was Maraudin freaking sealed, and like this card was in my sealed pool. Needless to say, I think I basically went undefeated. Yeah, I went undefeated in my first sealed event ever. It felt unusually easy, and eventually somebody said, "Oh my God, he freaking opened Sword of Fire and Ice! Like, of course he's like sweeping this," and like, yeah, and obviously sealed is a totally different animal. Sealed, like something like this, don't think it handles something like this a lot of times. But yeah, one of the things I started noticing even as early as like that sealed event that I played in first is just, man, this card, like, even when they're chump blocking, when you force them into a situation where they have to keep chump blocking, that is card advantage. Sure, you don't get the damage too, but, like, unless you're living in Magical Christmas Land, a lot of times, like, that's kind of icing on the cake, but really, like, if you grind them down, if they have to keep chump blocking, this creature, because you're going to get insane value, and a lot of times even kill the chump blocker if you don't block, that is an insane amount of value. It's not GT level good, but this is honestly the closest thing to GT that Modern has, even when you're not using the protection abilities. And honestly, even in Legacy, there was a lot of times where, even before True Name Nemesis was printed, that I would fetch this instead of GT. Because one of the things about GT is that GT doesn't necessarily have this effect against some decks, like certain control-ish or mid-ranges type decks. It doesn't necessarily have the same effect that if you connect like once or twice, or even connecting once, is basically feels like it's almost game over for the opponent. It's of course not game over, but a lot of times it can feel that way. Because especially like against the mid-range or the control decks, a lot of times they can deal with a GT even when it's got like 6 counters on it or something, and then sure you can gain a lot of life, but you know, if there's not any creatures to kill, you know, a lot of times connecting with GT a lot doesn't automatically translate into a win. Of course, this is modern, so there's no GT. But my point is just when sometimes this, when you'd be surprised how often this card actually was even better than GT, given the circumstances, of course. I think that speaks a lot to its power level, and I don't hear that getting discussed a lot. I think this card is super duper solid. Aven Mindscensor, let's just discuss this really briefly. Why am I playing this instead of Leonin Arbiter? Okay, very simple. Like I said, Leonin Arbiter just always felt like when it wasn't doing anything, it was just terrible. There were some decks that it didn't do anything against. There were some decks that had fetches, but I mean, they could pay the 2 and play around it, and I was kind of slowing them down. But actually, man, I think 3 out of the 4 games I played in my first league ever with taxes, where I was just miserable, I think 3 freaking games out of the 4, from what I remember. And honestly, the 4th one was probably the taxes matchup. Yeah, and the taxes matchup, I don't think I had Stoneforge in my hand, but Leonin Arbiter was already just not really good that much anyway. Although actually Taxes has a surprising amount of search, at least with Stoneforge Mystic. Maybe that's really it, but yeah, like against at least I think 3 out of the 4 matches I played with Leonin Arbiter, I had Stoneforge Mystic in my hand too. And most of the time I played Arbiter first, and I think that was correct because I was noticing that my opponents, and obviously I only did that if my opponent's first land kind of wasn't like E-Tron or wasn't suggesting. Well, I mean, E-Tron they might have Expedition Map, but anyway, if the first thing they played suggested that they had fetch lands in their deck, I would usually lead on Leonin Arbiter. And I think that was correct because I was noticing that they were kind of like awkwardly stumbling around with their mana, sometimes getting to 3, paying a fetch land, paying 2. You know, like it was definitely slowing them down. The problem was it was slowing me down too, because a lot of those games I needed to play that Stoneforge Mystic. And sure, eventually they dealt with the Leonin Arbiter, and then that freed up my Stoneforge Mystic, which, you know, some games I also just paid for to play Stoneforge Mystic. But that always felt terrible when I had to do that. You know, I know that the Taxes community is fairly you know, satisfied that these cards are not true non-bows with each other, but I don't think it can be doubted that they do conflict. They don't like prevent you from playing each other, but anyway, it is worth noting that at least once I did see a Taxes player accidentally play a Stoneforge Mystic with his or her own Leonin Arbiter in play, and forgot that it would prevent the search. That obviously shouldn't happen if you're more familiar with the deck, but that obviously won't happen if Arbiter's not in the deck. And a lot of times you just have Arbiter and Stoneforge Mystic. I kind of wish if Arbiter was a 1-mana card, then oof, that would be over. Both because it'd just be intrinsically more powerful, no doubt about it, but also because you could curve it into Stoneforge Mystic. I mean, that does like raise the question. I mean, you know, you could play Esper Sentinel. I could try Esper Sentinel, and honestly, that is a card that that I have on my radar, and I thought about playing. It was either that or Thraben Inspector, but I just like the internal synergy with Thraben Inspector, the more guaranteed synergy. Oh yeah, and I think the biggest problem with Esper Sentinel is in some matchups, it's just going to be kind of a 1/1. Either they really don't have much non-creature spells at all, or their deck is such that, like kind of like our deck could basically almost always easily pay the tax. And the 1/1 body is just so unimpressive. Sure, but that's true of Thraben Inspector too. But the difference is, Thraben Inspector, you can just cash in that clue token, and as unimpressive as the body may be, you know, you can still go 1 card deeper to find your bigger bodies and your equipment and all of that. Esper Sentinel doesn't do that. When it's not good, it just sits around as basically a 1/1 for 1, and that's kind of unacceptable in this deck. Now, admittedly, I have not played with it yet. The card does seem super sweet, especially when your opponent forgets the triggers, which I'm not going to lie, that happened to me. That happened to me once. I forgot the triggers, and I think my opponent drew 2 cards because they had 2 Esper Sentinels in play, and they promptly proceeded to win with 2 extra cards. So, you know, it is a powerful card to be sure, but yeah, and honestly, like, I would definitely be more inclined to play Esper Sentinel than Leonin Arbiter for that reason, because it's 1 mana basically, and it also doesn't conflict with Stoneforge. And anyway, enough said. So Leonin Arbiter, yeah, I much prefer Aven Mindscensor, and I know it might seem weird because you're basically 1 turn further away from keeping them off mana, but But hear me out here. I feel like I already went over why I don't think this is as problematic against Tron. You can go back in the video. I'd rather not. This video is almost going to be an hour probably. But like what I like about this card is it's always going to do something, even if the game goes late. You know, you can prevent them from fetching a lot of times because a lot of times they don't have a basic within the top 4 cards of the library. So when you field a rune and you Ghost Quarter, a lot of times they're still just not going to get the land. And that means sometimes even after they have like 5 lands in play, if you've got enough field of runes and Ghost Quarters, sometime, and you've got a Thalia also in play sometimes, like even later in the game, when Leonin Arbiter, like they basically pulled out of Leonin Arbiter range, I've actually ground down some decks, you know, from like 5 lands to like 2, and I just know that you know, they were getting mana screwed from that. And that's just something you can't do with Leonin Arbiter. Like Aven Mindscensor, yeah, sure, you can't mana screw them as quickly, but you can also mana screw them later in the game after they've made more land drops. So far I have not necessarily felt incredibly let down by the ability. I also really like that it has Flash. Leonin Arbiter doesn't have Flash. I really like the way that Aven Mindscensor does. I also like the way, even without Aether Vial, you can juke them by like responding to Flash, and people forget about Aven Mindscensor. This just comes in and whoop, you can sometimes, you know, 3 mana Stone Rain them with a 2/1 flyer. And you know, also it's just worth noting. I mean, also I will note this is much better against Scapeshift. Of course, if they've got a random Lightning Bolt sitting around, then that may not necessarily save you. But you know, if they don't have like a Counterspell or a Lightning Bolt or something, unlike Leonin Arbiter, which they can just always pay the 2/4, so it's just not an issue. If they're that much mana, of course, you know, sometimes you can slow them down. I think would be the idea from all their Search for Tomorrows or whatever it is they're playing. But Aven Mindscensor, oh yeah, also against Amulet Titan, freaking like Summoner's Pact makes their Summoner's Pact way more awkward. They a lot of times they don't have anything worth fetching. Maybe they can go and get a Boreal Grazer from the top like 4 cards, but also just against Amulet Titan itself. Yeah, just a lot of times you severely neuter it, and it continues to neuter it while it's in play. Like even because one of the problems with the Leonin Arbiter, sure, it prevents the Titan's first ability sometimes if they can't pay the extra 2. And if there's any deck that can pay an extra 2, it's Amulet Titan, so don't always necessarily count on that. But yeah, even Mindscensor, like, it just sits around, and even when they untap, that doesn't change the fact that it's going to be extremely awkward. They're not necessarily going to get the lands they want. They're going to get lands for sure in Amulet Titan, but it's better there. Scapeshift, like I said, you can flash this in, and you can actually stop Scapeshift, or at least make it extremely less likely. I guess Titan Shift, you know, it is possible they've got enough random mountains sitting around, and they may randomly... Yeah, I mean, I guess it's theoretically possible, but from what I've heard at least, it's a lot more likely that they're not able to cobble the win together with Scapeshift when you've got Aven Mindscensor, even against Titan Shift, but that's probably definitely the deck more likely, or maybe they can just randomly get enough mountains. But anyway, my point is Aven Mindscensor, the ability is just consistent. It's always useful, even later in the game. It's a more slow tax, but it's a tax that also just accrues. Every fetch land is a question mark, as long as it's in play, whether they get a land or not, and that'll add up. Like I said, sometimes even when they make many land drops over time, if they're just not making more land drops, and you draw more Field of Runes, more Ghost Quarters, and you gradually keep gnawing away at them, and in Field of Runes case, like I said earlier, like you're also not going down on lands. Like this card, unlike Leonin Arbiter, like I said, you just keep gnawing away at them, and sometimes you do end up bringing them down from you know, having healthy mana to a state of being mana screwed later in the game. You know, I already said that. I guess it's worth saying again. I've liked it so far. Admittedly, I've only played 1 league so far, and that 1 test game against Rogues. But even though I haven't necessarily set the world on fire yet in my test games, I have been thoroughly impressed with what I've seen so far. And by thoroughly impressed, I mean I don't mean this card is the best card ever. What I just mean is I feel like this card is way better than Leonin Arbiter. I mean, I know that's weird, and I know that might sound strange to say, but I just go by my experience, how I perceived it when I'm playing it, like the kind of value I've been accruing, the flexibility of playing it as a flash creature. Oh yeah, and I can't forget the flying. That's very important. The flying means you've got a better body for Sword of Fire and Ice. You know, for like just, you know, getting over attackers and sometimes like squeezing through. You'd be surprised how many times you'd win by just squeezing through. extra flying attacks, you know. Yeah, so like it's a better body. It's also more valuable later in the game because like unlike a grounded 2/2, which will sometimes just sit around and be a chump blocker later in the game, this card a lot of times can be in a position where you can chip in, and this can be an attacker that can help you win the game. Yeah, I just feel like this card overall has a lot more it stays much more relevant later in the game, and I just I like it a lot. I don't know what else to say. That takes us to Flickerwhisp. I think Taxis players are super familiar with why this card's so good. Basically, everything I said about Charming Plinch also applies to Flickerwisp, except you just have to wait one more turn for Aether Vial to tick up one more. I already went over like how on 3 mana you can flicker your Thraben Inspector, or you can even flicker your Charming Prince, or you can flicker another Flickerwisp, like I said before. It is worth noting you can also flicker your Mortarpod, and actually sometimes that's a hidden line. Like if they got another 1 toughness creature that's like worth killing, don't forget if you happen to randomly have a Mortarpod sitting in play. Just because a lot of times I'm not going to lie, I don't necessarily fetch Mortarpod, but sometimes it's just randomly in my hand. And that's one thing I like about it is it's like one of the few equipment that's worth fetching in a decent amount, and in a not insignificant, not completely irrelevant set of circumstances. But that's also just a lot of times just perfectly okay to just randomly draw. Honestly, even more so in a way than it's definitely more so than Batterskull and Kaldra to just randomly draw. Batterskull, I don't know. Sometimes it's just still a good top end to just randomly draw and have in your hand. A lot of times, you still don't necessarily want to have it start off. But Sword of Fire and Ice, a lot of times I love having this in my opening hand, so I can't say that about that. But yeah, anyway, so the point is you can flicker your Mortarpod and then get another token. You can flicker your Skyclave, obviously, like Charming Prince. Oh, don't forget, if they deal with the Batterskull token, you can Flickerwisp your Batterskull and get another living weapon token. I would say the same about Kaldra, but the token has indestructible, so unless they path it or something, which I guess could happen sometimes, you just won't be doing that as much with Kaldra. But if for whatever reason they are able to exile the token or something, or use a sack effect, you can Flickerwisp your Kaldra, and it's not gonna, it won't, the haste won't come up, but that turn at least. But the case won't come up, period, probably. But still, it's still surprisingly solid. Anyway, yeah. I thought there was something else I wanted to say about Flickerwisp. Yeah, it's just a flyer. It's just really solid. It's really good against tokens. Yeah. Oh, it's also like, I don't know, like the Taxis community knows, like you can also like end of turn hit it in Snaring Bridge. And if you flicker something at the end of turn, by the way, it won't come back until the end of the next end step. So like if you end of turn Flickerwisp in a Snaring Bridge, or more and more these days you see Solitary Confinement. If you end of turn flicker it, then your entire turn it's not going to be in play. So sometimes you can, sometimes this is kind of like a white Merfolk Trickster, at least when you have Aether Vial. When you don't, it's not as impressive, but still sometimes you can get good value. But yeah, this is such a switch RV knife. Until you've actually played with it, it's hard to realize just how good this is. But a lot of times it really does depend on Aether Vial. Like when I was playing an Aether Vial-less Taxis style deck in Legacy, I was not playing it because it's just not as impressive with that Aether Vial. It's still okay, but it's truly at its best with Aether Vial for sure. Skyclave Apparition, I'm just going to say enough said. Deal with anything 4 or less. They get a token, but a lot of times it just doesn't matter. Everybody knows at this point this card is one of the strongest cards White has. It is worth noting that I'm playing this instead of Path to Exile in the main, but I'm going to discuss why Path isn't in the main more when I get to Solitude, which is right soon. Batterskull, I also think enough said. I've gone over basically all the interactions now with the other cards, so it's Batterskull. Lifelink, valuable, untapped. You can play it off of Stoneforge Mystic on turn 3, immediately start going on the offense, and have a good defending body. It's kind of like the deck with Sarah Angel, but starting on turn 3. Sometimes that's good enough, a lot of times not, but at least it's a very powerful thing, especially against aggressive decks to threaten. And what I really like about Batterskull is it's really just a huge, valuable top end, no matter what. I like it. And I think everybody agrees it's pretty good. Also, the buyback means that unless they have artifact removal, sometimes it has to be instant speed artifact removal if you draw this really late and you have 3 mana up at most times to bounce it. Unless they have artifact removal and sometimes even instant speed artifact removal, it's going to be very hard for your opponent to ultimately deal with this, or counter magic, of course, but yeah. Okay, Solitude. I already explained the interactions about blinking it, which is insanely powerful, but make no mistake, the first and foremost reason why Solitude is in the deck is I think the card's just better than Path to Exile in this deck. We've got plenty of white creatures. Let's see, we've got 16, 20, 28, 32 white creatures. Yeah, we got 32 white creatures, so like we're good. Unlike the Hammer Time deck, we're good on the white count. So yeah, so basically we can always pitch it for the most part, and I think this, like I said, I think in the yeah, I don't know, yeah, like, and basically I think it compares favorably to Path to Exile, because Path to Exile is card disadvantage, but this is card disadvantage too. I mean, sure, this is card disadvantage, but so is Path to Exile, and we still know that was good. Sure, sometimes like the mana flood isn't relevant, but sometimes it really is, and in those cases, Solitude's going to be better. You'd be surprised how often you use this on mana dorks. You know, like if you got like 2 Thalias, or there's just something else that's not particularly good about your hand. Yeah, I mean, like, it's a free source to Plowshares, and you know, obviously source to Plowshares is better in many ways, but that's a legacy card, and this is modern, and I think, yeah, I mean, like I said, it's both this and Path to Exile are card disadvantage, but this is free. This also doesn't conflict with Thalia. This has all those synergies with blinking, and a lot of times, more often than you think, this is just a very strong top-end type card, where you go to 5 mana and you play this, and then also it's a body. It's a body that has lifelink, a very valuable ability, and also you can equip equipment to it. Like, trust me, at least, like, obviously, when I say trust me, like, I haven't necessarily, I'm not a master of the archetype by any means, but I am thoroughly impressed enough with the card that I think I can safely say Solitude is better in the main deck. It's a top end, it's a body, you can do tricks with it with Charming Prince and Flickerwhisp off of Aether Vial. It's 0 mana. Like, yeah, I love this card. I love this card. Oh, and also it's never dead, even against control. Oh yeah, and you can tick up sometimes this will come up. You tick up Aether Vial to 5, so you can truly play it for free and get the body. I mean, Path to Exile can't do all of that. Path to Exile we still have in our sideboard, but man, oh man, Solitude. I think this is so far and away the real deal in this deck. I want to play this deck more, because I think there's a lot of hidden power here. This is a tricky deck to play. There's a lot of interactions. There's a lot of interesting lines. I love this deck. I love, even if, I don't know, I'm telling you, like, overall, and one of the reasons I forgot to say why I kind of switched from Hammer Time was, like, that last match against, apparently that was Gabriel and the Thief, Bob the Dog. I didn't necessarily know that, or maybe I knew it, but I kind of forgot. That's not like it's not like Yellow Hat, which I automatically associate with what's his name, oh, I forget. Wait, isn't Yellow? I'm getting my pros mixed up, and anyway, whatever. It's not like Yellow Hat, who I immediately associate with that pro. You know. Anyway, but the point is, against that matchup against apparently Gabriel and the Thief with the Bob the Dog handle, you know, yeah, sure, we won that. We went to time, but I think that really illustrates the fundamental problem. And there's just so much control running around now. And the bigger problem is, sure, every deck has bad matchups, but when your bad matchup isn't just like a particular deck, but like an entire mega archetype, not even just one subtype of an archetype, but like, well, like one of the main types, like aggro, combo, control, when your bad matchup is like one of those three, that's definitely more of a red flag. And I certainly, heaven knows, I've played my fair share of decks that fall into that category, except their soft spot is combo. But for whatever reason, I think Magic is always going to have combo. I mean, it's always going to have control, aggro, and of course mid-range, which is kind of a midpoint between aggro and control. But I think Magic is always going to have way more aggro, mid-range, and control. You know, more creature-based or creature removal, creature interaction-based strategies, more forefront. And one of the reasons why is that basically combo decks, if they get too oppressive, Wizards always steps in. Wizards wants Magic to be about attacking with creatures, about interacting with creatures, removing creatures if you're a control deck. Like, they're okay with control decks, I think, at least up to a certain point. But I think fundamentally, Wizards is more okay with control, because even though control decks aren't always playing a lot of creatures, they're respecting creatures. They're not just ignoring creatures' existence. So creatures still like figure prominently into the game. I think Wizards doesn't like combo because it's just ignores creatures, which is it's just obviously what they want the game to be about. Anyway, I think I got to wrap this up soon because I'm not sure what'll happen when it gets to an hour. Anyway, Kaldra, I think this card has been just super solid. It's just basically a hasty good threat for yeah, it's just basically a really good hasty threat. Sometimes you just need to end the game earlier, and you'll know when the matchups are where they're less likely to have removal. And sometimes basically I think hardened scales, like that was one where I think like it's better to fetch this one up. So yeah. Anyway, it's almost uncastable, but sometimes you just you just need the extra late game potential anyway. I don't know. This is definitely the most experimental card, but so far, like when this has been good, and I guess like I said, it really only I've really so far only I mean, full disclosure, okay, maybe some of my experience in this league, because I'm actually technically recording this after I already played the league, for the reasons that I described in a previous video, why that happens more often than a decent amount of the time, but yeah, you'll know the matchups, and even going into this league when I just had the Rogues matchup under my belt for some test game, I felt strong enough that you'll know the matchup when this will be correct, and otherwise it's just kind of I guess another top end where sometimes you're just playing to it, and I could see this being incorrect. Ultimately, this used to be Maul of the Skyclaves in a previous build, but I just never ever fetched Maul of the Skyclaves except for once where I highly doubted that was correct. So I don't know. I mean, that card has definitely proved itself in the archetype, and one could say that definitely Mortarpod hasn't. So I could definitely see replacing Mortarpod. I mean, so far I have a feeling that Kaldra is probably going to be more of a mainstay, and I think it's more likely Mortarpod gets the cut, which is probably to the surprise of no one. But I've been liking Mortarpod enough that I'm certainly going to keep playing it until it just seems too bad to do so. Path to Exile. We all know Path to Exile, especially in this deck with Aven Mindscensor. Sometimes you can turn off the land, them getting a land, so it's even better. But other than that, it's just a solid removal spell. It's in the sideboard because essentially I feel like Solitude and Skyclave Apparition are basically the removal we need in the main deck. I don't want to go overboard. It also means that we have no completely dead cards in basically any matchup. Even the Mortarpod you can equip to it. And Path to Exile in some matchups is basically dead. So, oh yeah, I forgot to mention with Solitude, you can actually, in the burn matchup, sometimes if you're even if you're completely tapped out, and you're at say 2 life and they lightning bolt you, you can exile your Charming Prince or whatever it is, gain 2 life and push yourself over the limit. That comes up a lot in Legacy of Swords to Plowshares. It's surprisingly relevant, and I think yeah, being able to gain some life yourself is going to be it's going to be very powerful. And I haven't placed burn yet, but I can tell you I think that's going to be great. Relic of Progenitus, we all know, excellent graveyard hate, especially when you're not using it yourself. I guess you're using it a little bit with Sword of Light and Shadow, but we'll get to that in a second. Manriki Gusari, like I said in the Hammer Time deck, just Mirror Breaker. I think too powerful not to have somewhere in your 75. I mean, obviously more so in your sideboard. It's not going to come in a lot, but when it does, there's really no equal to just having a free anti-equipment that also pumps. Sort of body and mind. I think kind of like I may have said already, basically what you want is, what this is basically for is most matchups where green's going to be an issue, because obviously you already have blue covered with Sword of Fire and Ice, but yeah, if green's an issue, this helps. It also is, I think, the third best sword, because you always at least get a 2/2 body, and that's basically almost always relevant. And you can actually, this is the only sword where you can attack, get a body, and then even with no other creatures in play, you can just re-equip the sword to that. So against a green deck, sometimes that can be quite a difficult proposition to have a never-ending supply of an army that keeps attacking. But what's also surprisingly relevant is that milling 10 cards. Now, the reason why this isn't the main is because there's a lot of decks where that's actually going to help them, but there's a lot of decks where it won't necessarily, and sometimes against Heliod combo, for example, I really like that this is an alternate win condition. I mean, a few attacks from this, and you can easily end the game by milling. I mean, it really, most of the time, it only takes about 4 attacks. Usually they already work themselves about 20 cards deep, just naturally. So, I mean, that won't always come up, but trust me, I actually played this in Legacy a decent amount. Especially, basically what happened was when True Name Nemesis was printed, I was, I was tired of when they were dealing with my Sword of Fire and Ice, because then I was just more cold to True Name Nemesis. So I was kind of looking for either... I was thinking about playing like 2 swords of Fire and Ice, but I thought, well, maybe I can try another sword, so I could mix it up a little, while also having an alternate pro-blue. And that's when I discovered this card, and I actually played with it, and I realized, yeah, I mean, it's not as good as Sword of Fire and Ice the majority of the time, but dang, man, it's actually closer than you might think, and I liked having access to this in Legacy when they dealt with my Sword of Fire and Ice. This was still really, really sweet, and this still helped me get past True Name. True Name's not an issue here in Modern, but trust me, from that experience, it's better than it looks. Yeah, I mean, just for green, it's nice to have. Sword of Light and Shadow, yeah, or Infinite Life. Sword of Light and Shadow. Little bit of a nombo with Relic, but you know, I mean, we even played Relic and Hammer Bogarden in the red deck sometimes, like, cause you can play around this a lot of times with when you crack and whatnot. But at the end of the day, this is the second most powerful sword, I think, and I think that's pretty clear. It's particularly powerful in this deck because, like I said, if this is equipped to a 2 toughness creature, you're already at a lightning bolt range. Plus, you have protection from the 2 most other played colors, other than the lightning bolt color red. You have protection from Plowshares, protection from other Solitudes, protection from Fatal Push and black removal. But also the gaining life is relevant, like against burn. I think a lot of times you want to bring this in as just more ways to gain life. It's actually better against burn than Sword of Fire and Ice, because even though Sword of Fire and Ice is pro-red, you want to be gaining life, not necessarily doing more damage. But here's another thing. In this deck in particular, man, the few times I've sided this in, it's just been so sweet, because it just so happened that a lot of those times I had Solitude, and I exiled it for whatever reason, so I had like a Solitude or 2 sitting in the graveyard, and oh man, let me tell you, recurring Solitude with this, oh, that is so sweet. That is so sweet. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's as good as, it's hands down not as good as this, and having 2 swords in the main I think is a little iffy, because you could just have 2 dead swords sitting around not doing anything. So, yeah. Anyway, but certainly when the pro-white or the pro-black or the life gain is warranted, the ability to rebuy a creature is super solid too. Yeah, and even sometimes, like if the game goes along, even if you don't have anything in the graveyard, it is worth noting that Mortarpod unlocks the ability for you to sack something like Flickerwhisp or Skyclave Apparition or even Solitude or Thraben Inspector, whatever, some of your value creatures, and then you can rebuy them for like the trigger again. That may not always be correct, but like it is just a little extra cool thing that Mortarpod unlocks. We're gonna wrap this up. So the last thing I'm gonna say is there's Archon. This was actually Deafening Silence in the previous league. I thought it was clever because I thought, yes, a card that hoses Storm, hoses a lot of cards I want. I don't necessarily need another body, although not going to lie, having another body would be pretty sweet. But I'm like, it hoses Living End, and it hoses the Timor Waterfalls deck. So I was like, yes, except only one problem. It doesn't hose Timor Waterfalls. Oh, I forgot that Shardless Agent is a creature, so it just doesn't care about Deafening Silence, and it still gets them their Crashing Footfalls or their Ancestral Vision, and that's why I'm just playing Archon, because this, not messing around. There's no deck that can get around this. Oh yeah, I also thought, okay, maybe Aethersworn Canonist. Nope, wrong again. Because Shardless Agent is an artifact creature for some unknown reason, so it also ignores that. Yay! Shardless Agent. Suddenly I'm feeling a lot less good about that being in the format. But anyway, I went to those first, Deafening Silence and Aethersworn Canonist, because those are 1 and 2 respectively, so you can actually maybe shut off the Cascade ability before turn 3. Fortunately, unless I'm missing something, I don't think there's a card that does do that and also works on Shardless Agent, so this is one of the only cards I can think of that also has flying, so good body. The non-basic land ability may or may not do something sometimes. But yeah, I mean, it's a 2/3 flying creature with this ability. Sure, they might get a Crashing Footfalls through, but hopefully, the plan is hopefully I can deal with them doing that once, and then maybe like if I get this in play, at least I prevent that from happening in the future. Will it be good enough? I mean, heck if I know, but that's the idea with these things being in here. Also good against Storm, and I don't know. This card was always annoying when I was playing Red, because I basically needed Lightning Bolt. I couldn't deal with this with Firebolt and Lava Dart or any other combination of Merge Balls. Had to be Lightning Bolt, basically. So, anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. The recording sometimes doesn't work after a certain amount of time, so All right, take care. If you like this comment, smash that like button. Just smash the like button, and I'm going to leave it at that. Take care. Let's get to the games. Let's go. This is one of the longest deck techs I've ever had. All right. Quick shout out to my patrons. Thank you so much to my new patrons who signed up since last week, or since the last deck tech went up. Thank you, Alexi. Excuse me if I'm mispronouncing your name. Sherabaku. Thank you so much, Brendan Hopgood. Thank you so much, Trent Crofts. And of course, thank you to all of my patrons who supported me as of the last deck tech that went up. So thank you again so much, Frederick LeMay, Povilis Tamauskas, Alexis, Jeremy Elder, Brett, Michael Patton, Tyler Smith, Jonas Sandagger, and SWDJP. Thank you again, everyone. And of course, thank you to everyone who is just liking and commenting and watching the video. That's kind of like the foundation that this whole MHayashi YouTube channel and YouTube channels now, too, really got started from. So by no means, am I taking anything away from anybody who can only support in that way. But I also want to give a little special, shout out to the patrons, because of course, going forward, definitely the patron support is going to be very helpful for helping the channel, take the channel to greater heights. So again, thank you so much. I also want to just give you all a preview of what's coming up the week after next, because I know last time this was in like an announcement video, but maybe I'll just start including this in the shout out videos going forward. But yeah, so next, so not this following week. This following week's it's gonna be those videos that were discussed on the last announcement video. This coming week, starting tomorrow, Sunday, we're going to have Death and Taxes and Obosh Dragonhammer without Fury. But then the week after this coming week, I'm going to have Mono Green Infect, Mono Green 12 Exalted Infect, and I'm going to have my first league that I've recorded with Mono Red Obosh Dragonhammer, this time playing Fury. And for those who are interested, these are now all combined into one video. I am going to have them broken up and published one by one like usual when they go up the week after the following week. But if you want to see them all combined into one video, come on over here on Patreon as well, and I've got them all combined. I might end up publishing the combined videos once they're done uploading piece by piece throughout the week. But hopefully those don't like have too low viewership. I'm a little concerned if I upload videos and they don't get a lot of views, but I suppose it's worth trying maybe. Either way. For the time being though, we've got this too, like early access content coming up, and if you can't wait to see the Fury make its debut, or rather its reintroduction, because I was hyped on it when it was first spoiled, and I did do some practice games. I don't know that I actually recorded anything with Fury though before, but certainly, so this might actually be the debut in my recorded games where I give Fury a second chance. And for those who follow me on Twitter, you all know you all know the, how can I say, you all know where that went. So yeah, and of course for those who are dying to see the mythical mono green deck that I mentioned, that I've been mentioning, I've got that also on early access. Again, this will be up the week after this following week, but if you all are dying to see this right now, come on over to my Patreon, become a patron. It's just $3 a month. That's like the minimum that Patreon recommended as the starting pledge, and definitely I appreciate all the support you can give. So take care, everyone. Have a wonderful week. Again, I thank you all for your support. You all have a wonderful week. Take care, and hope you all enjoy the continued content. And yes, I will be getting that new microphone, and I will be doing an announcement. I might just do the announcement in these shout outs. That seems like maybe the best the best time to do that, so I don't have to needlessly multiply my announcement videos. But in any case, take care, everyone. And again, thank you to all of my viewers, all my patrons. Thank you.